The lecture hall smelled like recycled air and old data tablets. 200 students from 40 different worlds sat in curved rows, their attention fixed on the holographic display floating above the podium. Lydia Grant sat in the back corner, her fingers pressed flat against the desk surface, trying to stay calm. Professor Halvin moved across the stage with the confidence of someone who had given this lecture 100 times before. His tall frame and forearms made him impossible to miss. The Taurian scholar was famous across 3 sectors for his work on fallen civilizations. Students competed for seats in his classes. Today we examine the most complete case study of species-level failure, Halvin announced. His voice carried easily through the hall. The world called Earth. Lydia felt her jaw tighten. She had known this day would come eventually. Every history student in the galaxy learned about Earth, her Earth. The hologram shifted to show a blue and green planet. It looked beautiful. Then the image changed. Cities choked with smog, oceans turning gray, forests burning. The year marker read 2045. By the mid-21st century, humanity had pushed their world to the breaking point, Halvin continued. He pulled up graphs and charts. Temperature rising, species dying, wars spreading. They knew what was happening. Their own scientists warned them repeatedly. Yet they continued down the path of destruction. A Keshan student in the 3rd row raised one of her smaller hands. Professor, did they not try to stop it? Some tried, Halvin admitted. He showed footage of protests and demonstrations. Humans holding signs, humans shouting at their leaders. But their political systems were fragmented. Their economic structures prioritized short-term gain over long-term survival. They were biologically incapable of the kind of collective action necessary to save themselves. Lydia wanted to stand up and scream. She forced herself to stay seated. Her roommate Nira sat 3 rows ahead. The Keshan girl glanced back at Lydia with worried eyes. She knew this had to be hard to hear. The hologram showed more devastation. The year marker moved forward. 2067, 2078, 2089. Each year looked worse than the last. Cities underwater, refugee camps stretching for miles, nuclear exchanges lighting up the night sky. Their population peaked at 11 billion in 2053, Halvin explained. By 2089, it had dropped to 3 billion. Most of those survivors were struggling to find food and clean water. Their global systems had collapsed completely. He paused for effect. The lecture hall was silent except for the hum of the environmental systems. By 2100, Earth had fallen. The survivors scattered to the stars as refugees. A cautionary tale written in the bones of 8 billion dead. Halvin looked out at his students. What lesson do we take from this? Hands went up around the room. A Vaunt student spoke first. That species must prioritize collective survival over individual gain. Correct, Halvin said. Another student added. That environmental destruction is a path to extinction. Also correct. A third voice called out. That some species lack the capacity for the kind of change required to survive technological advancement. Halvin nodded slowly. A harsh assessment, but the evidence supports it. Humanity proved unable to overcome their own nature. The result was predictable and total collapse. Lydia could not stay quiet anymore. Her hand went up. Several students turned to look. There were only 12 humans in the entire institute. Everyone knew who she was. Halvin noticed her raised hand. He seemed surprised but gestured for her to speak. Yes, Miss Grant? Lydia stood up. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Did you even read the ending? The question hung in the air. Halvin blinked his 4 eyes in sequence. I'm sorry, what? The ending, Lydia repeated. She started walking down the aisle toward the front. Her datapad was in her hand. Of Earth's story. Did you read to the end, or did you stop in the middle and assume you knew how it finished? Confused murmurs spread through the hall. Nira was watching with wide eyes. Other students looked back and forth between Lydia and their professor. Halvin's expression showed polite confusion. Miss Grant, I have studied Earth's history extensively. The records are quite clear about what happened to your homeworld. Which records? Lydia reached the front of the hall. Because the ones you just showed stopped at 2100, what happened after that? After the collapse? Halvin spread his forearms. The few survivors gradually developed spaceflight. They joined Galactic Society as refugees around 2190, we know this. Right, Lydia said. We joined as refugees. So you assumed Earth must have died. Did you ever check? The professor looked at her like she was a student who had not done the required reading. Miss Grant, the planet was devastated. The evidence of collapse is overwhelming. The evidence of crisis is overwhelming, Lydia corrected him. Crisis and collapse are not the same thing. She activated her datapad. The holographic display flickered as she overwrote it with her own files. New images appeared above the podium. Earth again, but different. Green returning to the land. Blue oceans clear and bright. Cities rebuilt with trees growing between buildings. The year marker read 2156. The lecture hall erupted in whispers. Halvin stared at the display. What is this? This is Earth in 2156, Lydia said. 56 years after you said it fell. Does this look fallen to you? She scrolled through more images. The Global Commons Agreement of 2091. The Atmospheric Reversal Project showing measurable results by 2134. Population graphs showing stabilization and then healthy growth. Economic recovery data. Species restoration programs. Peace treaties that actually held. You taught a room full of future historians that Earth fell, Lydia continued. Her voice carried to every corner of the hall. You used my homeworld as your definitive example of failure. But you only told them half the story. You showed them our darkest hour and called it our ending. Halvin looked genuinely shaken. These records, where did you get them? From Earth, Lydia said simply. I was born there. I lived there until I was 18. I walked on that supposedly dead world every day. But the galactic surveys, Halvin protested weakly. The reports from 2087 clearly stated that Earth was in terminal decline. Terminal decline in 2087, Lydia agreed. Which we pulled out of. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You're teaching the middle of our story like it was the conclusion. We didn't fall, Professor. We caught ourselves. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. 200 students stared at the images of a thriving Earth. Halvin looked at Lydia. For the first time in the semester, the confident professor appeared uncertain. If what you're saying is true, he began carefully, if Earth recovered from that level of devastation, then the entire premise of this lecture is wrong. Yes, Lydia said. It is. Halvin studied the data on the display. His scholarly mind was clearly racing through implications. This would require a complete revision of accepted historical understanding. Or, Lydia offered, you could let me show you. Come to Earth, see for yourself. Then you can decide what needs to be revised. The professor looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He nodded. Next class is canceled, Halvin announced. I need to verify some things. 3 days passed before Lydia heard from Professor Halvin again. She was in the Institute library surrounded by data tablets showing historical accounts of Earth when he found her. Miss Grant. His voice made her look up. The Torian professor stood at the end of her study table. His forearms carried multiple datapads. He looked like he had not slept. We need to talk. Lydia gestured to the empty chair across from her. Halvin sat down, setting his tablets on the table with more force than necessary. I spent 3 days reviewing everything I could access about Earth, he said. His voice was quiet enough that other students could not hear. The official galactic archives stop updating Earth's status after 2089. Every reference to Earth after that date treats it as a failed world. But I found something in the old survey logs. He pulled up a document on one of his tablets. The initial contact team that discovered Earth in 2087 filed their report during your planet's worst period. They labeled it a dying world and recommended no intervention. Standard protocol is to file follow-up surveys every 20 years, but no one ever filed a follow-up for Earth. Why not? Lydia asked, though she already knew. Because it was marked as failed, Halvin admitted. Failed worlds get moved to historical archives. No one rechecks them. We assumed we knew how the story ended. Lydia felt a mix of vindication and frustration. So for 200 years, the galaxy just believed Earth died. And no one bothered to check. When humans developed faster than light travel and joined galactic society in 2190, we treated them as refugees, Halvin continued. Survivors of a dead world who had managed to escape and rebuild elsewhere. The narrative was already set. We tried to tell you, Lydia said. I've read the early contact records. Human diplomats explicitly stated that Earth was alive and recovering, but no one believed them. Halvin's expression showed something like shame. Because the story of Earth as a fallen world was too useful, it became the standard example in every cautionary course. Tens of thousands of students across hundreds of institutions learned about the importance of environmental protection by studying Earth's failure. To admit we got it wrong would mean admitting systemic failure in our own academic processes. He looked at the images still displayed on Lydia's tablets. Green forests, blue oceans, cities full of life. I need to see it, Halvin said. Not just data. Not just images. I need to walk on Earth and see for myself. I told you I would take you, Lydia reminded him. There are protocols, Halvin began. Then he stopped himself. No, the protocols are part of the problem. We follow the established procedures and accepted narratives instead of seeking truth. He looked at her directly. Can you really arrange transport to Earth? My aunt is a freighter captain, Lydia explained. She runs supplies between Earth and the outer colonies. She comes through this sector once a month. Her next stop here is in 4 days. I want to bring other witnesses, Halvin said. This cannot just be my word against 2 centuries of accepted history. I need other faculty and students to see what I see. Lydia considered this. Nira would come. She's my roommate. She's been asking questions about Earth since my first week here, and maybe 2 or 3 other students who can think for themselves. Dean Samos should come, Halvin added. He chairs the Historical Accuracy Committee. If anyone can authorize a formal revision of the records, it's him. They spent the next hour making plans. Halvin would request an educational expedition. Lydia would contact her Aunt Ridley. They would need permission from Earth's liaison office, supplies, equipment, clearances. When Nira found out, she was thrilled. The Keshan girl bounced on her lower legs with excitement. I'm going to Earth! The actual Earth! You understand what we're trying to prove, right? Lydia asked. This isn't just tourism. I know, Nira said. We're going to prove that the galaxy has been wrong for 200 years. We're going to rewrite history. She paused. That's a big responsibility. Yes, Lydia agreed. It is. Dean Samos took more convincing. The Vaunt administrator sat in his office, his scaled hands folded on his desk, listening to Halvin's request with obvious skepticism. You want to take an academic expedition to Earth based on the claims of one student? Samos asked. Based on verifiable data that contradicts our accepted historical record, Halvin corrected. Miss Grant has provided documentation that suggests Earth did not collapse as we believed. This warrants investigation, or it warrants a lesson in source verification, Samos countered. How do we know these documents are authentic? They could be propaganda. They could be fabricated. Which is why we need to go there, Halvin insisted. In person. To verify the truth, Samos looked at Lydia. You claim Earth is thriving, yet humans in galactic society are few and scattered. Why would a recovered Earth send so few of its people to the stars? Lydia met his gaze. Because we spent a century fixing our world. By the time we developed faster than light travel, we had a home worth staying on. Most humans chose to remain there. The few of us out here are explorers and traders, not refugees. The dean was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, If I approve this expedition, I'm coming with you. I need to see this supposed thriving Earth with my own eyes. Agreed, Halvin said immediately. 4 days later, they stood in the docking bay of West Mark 7 station. Lydia's Aunt Ridley walked down the cargo ramp of her freighter, with the easy confidence of someone who had spent 30 years in space. She was shorter than Lydia, with gray streaking through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. So you're the professor who told a lecture hall that Earth was dead, Ridley said to Halvin. She did not sound angry, just amused. I am correcting that error, Halvin replied stiffly. Good. Ridley clapped him on one of his shoulders. Because you're about to have your entire worldview rebuilt from the ground up. She looked at the group. Halvin, Dean Samos, Nira, 2 other students. Everyone grab a bunk. It's a 3-week journey to Earth. Hope you all like recycled air and freeze-dried food. As they boarded the ship, Lydia felt a strange mix of emotions. She was going home. But more than that, she was bringing witnesses. She was bringing people who would see the truth and could not deny it. The freighter lifted off from the station. The stars stretched into lines as they jumped to faster than light speed. Dean Samos stood at the viewing port watching the universe blur past. 3 weeks, he said quietly. 3 weeks to Earth. I hope you understand what you're claiming, Miss Grant. If you're right, we have to rewrite 2 centuries of history. If you're wrong, you'll be remembered as the student who wasted everyone's time on a wild chase. I'm not wrong, Lydia said simply. You'll see. The freighter's common area was cramped but functional. A small table bolted to the floor, chairs that folded into the walls, a food dispenser that produced meals that tasted like cardboard no matter what you ordered. This was where the group spent most of their time during the 3-week journey. On day 5, Nira asked the question everyone had been thinking. What was it really like? During the bad times? Lydia was quiet for a moment. She had not lived through those times. Her grandmother had. My grandmother was born in 2081. She was 8 years old when things were at their worst. She told me stories when I was young, about days when the air outside was too dangerous to breathe, about rationing water, about cities that went dark because the power grids failed. The group listened in silence. Even Ridley, who was checking navigation charts, paused to hear. She said the hardest part was not the physical suffering, Lydia continued. It was the feeling that nothing would ever get better, that humanity had broken something that could not be fixed, that this was just how life would be from now on until the end. How did they overcome that? Dean Samos asked. He sounded genuinely curious. They decided to, Lydia said. It sounds too simple when I say it like that. But that's what it came down to. In 2090, something shifted. I'm not sure exactly what. My grandmother said it was like the whole world took a breath and decided to try one more time. She pulled up documents on her tablet. The Global Commons Agreement of 2091 was the first big step. 200 nations signed it. They agreed to treat certain resources as shared commons instead of national property. The atmosphere, the oceans, the remaining forests. It meant giving up sovereignty over things that had always belonged to whoever controlled the land. That must have been incredibly difficult, Halvin said. Species rarely surrender power voluntarily. They did not have a choice, Ridley interjected. It was surrender some power or watch everyone die. Even the most stubborn politicians could do that math, Lydia continued. The Atmospheric Reversal Project started in 2095. Every nation contributed. They built machines to pull carbon from the air. They planted billions of trees in coordinated reforestation projects. They changed industrial processes. It took 40 years before they saw real results, but they kept going. She showed them images, comparison shots of the same locations in 2095 and 2135, gray skies turning blue, dead rivers running clear again, deserts transforming back into grasslands. The population stabilization happened naturally, Lydia explained. As conditions improved, as education spread, as women gained more control over their lives, birth rates leveled out. By 2140, Earth had about 6 billion people, healthy, educated, living in balance with their world. Dean Samos studied the data carefully. These numbers would be impressive if they're accurate. But Miss Grant, you must understand my skepticism. This level of recovery from that level of devastation is unprecedented in galactic records. Maybe it shouldn't be, Lydia said. Maybe we need to stop treating recovery as impossible and start treating collapse as preventable. The conversation continued for hours. Lydia showed them records of the seed vault revival. In 2098, scientists had opened the global seed vaults that had been protected through the worst times. They began restoring plant species that had gone extinct. By 2150, they had brought back over 4,000 species. We did the same for animals, Lydia said. Genetic samples that had been frozen. Carefully managed breeding programs. It took generations, but species came back. Not all of them. We lost too many, but more than anyone thought possible. Nira looked at images of forests full of life. This is amazing. Why doesn't everyone know about this? Because no one wants to believe it, Ridley said bluntly. I've been trading with outer colonies for 30 years. Every time I mention Earth, people look at me with pity. Oh, you're from that dead world. Must be hard. When I try to correct them, they think I'm being defensive, like I can't accept what happened to my home. Halvin looked uncomfortable. I contributed to that narrative. I taught it as fact. You weren't alone, Lydia said. Every educational institution in the galaxy teaches the same story. Earth is the cautionary tale. Earth is the example of what not to do. No one ever checks if the cautionary tale actually ended the way they think it did. On day 12, they gathered to review what would happen when they arrived. Ridley brought up navigation charts showing Earth's location. We'll come out of faster than light speed at the edge of the solar system. Earth Control will contact us immediately. They're very particular about who approaches the planet. Will they allow us to land? Dean Samos asked. I sent word ahead, Ridley said. The liaison office approved our visit. They're actually excited. They've been trying to correct the galactic record for decades. Having a Taurian professor and Avant Dean come see the truth might finally make a difference. What should we expect when we arrive? Halvan asked Lydia. She smiled. A world that's alive. That's the simplest way to put it. You're going to see cities that work, systems that function, people who are healthy and educated and hopeful about their future. It's not perfect. We still have problems, but it's not the devastated wasteland you're expecting. I'm not expecting a wasteland anymore, Halvan admitted. The data you've shown is too consistent to be fabricated, but I still need to see it, to walk on that ground, to talk to people who live there. You will, Lydia promised. On day 19, Dean Samos gathered everyone for what he called a formal statement. Regardless of what we find on Earth, I want it understood that this expedition is an official academic investigation. Our findings will be documented and submitted to the Historical Accuracy Committee. If Earth has indeed recovered as Miss Grant claims, we have an obligation to correct the record. And if it hasn't? One of the other students asked. Then we document that too, Samos said firmly. Truth is truth, regardless of what we hope to find. Lydia appreciated that even if she knew what they would find. On day 21, they entered Earth's solar system. Ridley brought them out of faster than light speed with practiced ease. The ship's sensors immediately picked up activity. Lots of activity. Well, Ridley said, looking at her displays. That's Earth orbit up ahead. Still think it's a dead world, Dean Samos? The Dean moved to the viewport. His scaled face showed surprise. Dozens of ships moved in organized patterns around a blue and green planet. Orbital stations dotted the space around it. Solar collectors stretched across thousands of kilometers. Communications satellites numbered in the hundreds. This was not a dead world. This was not even a struggling world. This was a world that was thriving. Message coming in from Earth Control, Ridley announced. They're welcoming us home and asking for our landing coordinates. Halvan stared at the planet below. I taught that this world had fallen. I was so certain. Then let's go find out what actually happened, Lydia said. The real story, from beginning to end. The freighter adjusted course and began its descent toward Earth. The shuttle broke through the cloud layer over what had once been called the Pacific Northwest. Halvan pressed his face to the viewport, all four of his eyes wide with disbelief. Below them stretched forests so thick and green they looked like a living carpet. Rivers ran clear and bright between the trees. Small settlements dotted the landscape, built to blend with nature rather than dominate it. This is impossible, Dean Samos whispered. He was looking out another viewport. The projections from 2089 showed this entire region would be uninhabitable by 2110. The projections were based on humanity doing nothing, Lydia said. We did something. The shuttle approached a city that rose from the landscape like it had grown there naturally. Buildings reached upward, but their sides were covered in vertical gardens. Trees lined every street. Parks interrupted the urban space every few blocks. Solar panels and wind collectors integrated seamlessly into the architecture. This is Seattle, Vancouver, Ridley announced as she guided the shuttle toward a landing pad. One of the megacities. About 8 million people live in the greater metropolitan area. 8 million, Neera breathed. It looks so clean. Where's the pollution? The smog? Gone, Lydia said simply. It took decades to clear, but it's gone. They landed at a public spaceport on the edge of the city. As the shuttle's doors opened, Halvan hesitated. Lydia understood. He was about to step onto a world he had declared dead. His entire academic reputation was built partly on that declaration. It's just air, Ridley said, walking past him down the ramp. It won't bite, Halvan followed, then stopped completely as he took his first breath of Earth's atmosphere. His forearms spread slightly. It's clean. I expected industrial byproducts, chemical traces, but this is clean air. We worked hard for that, a new voice said. A human woman waited at the base of the ramp. She was perhaps 70 years old, with dark skin and gray hair pulled back in a simple style. Professor Halvan, I presume. I'm Dr. Ruth Okafor. I serve as Earth's liaison to galactic affairs. Halvan composed himself and approached her. Dr. Okafor, thank you for allowing this visit. Thank you for being willing to see the truth, Ruth replied. She nodded to Lydia. Good to see you again, Lydia. Your grandmother sends her regards. How is she? Lydia asked, complaining about her garden as usual. Ruth said with a smile. Then she turned to the group. I imagine you all have many questions. Let me try to answer some before you ask. Yes, Earth nearly died. Yes, we lost 8 billion people. Yes, we caused that devastation ourselves. All of that is true. What the galaxy seems to have missed is what came after. She gestured toward a vehicle waiting nearby. Come, I'll show you. They drove through the city in an electric transport. Dean Samos kept his face pressed to the window like a child. Humans walked the streets, rode bicycles, sat in cafes. Children played in parks. Everything looked normal, healthy, alive. The population here is diverse, Halvin observed. Different ethnicities. How did you avoid the tribal conflicts that usually follow collapse scenarios? We didn't avoid them, Ruth said honestly. From 2067 to 2089, we had terrible conflicts. People blamed each other for the crisis. Old hatreds resurfaced. But eventually, we realized that killing each other over who was at fault wouldn't bring back the dead or fix the damage. The reconciliation commissions of 2093 were brutal. People had to face what they'd done, what their nations had done, but it was necessary. They passed a massive building with gardens on every level. That's a vertical farm, Ruth explained. We produce about 40% of the city's food inside the city limits. The rest comes from rural areas that are recovering productivity. The oceans? Nira asked. Are they recovering too? Come see, Ruth said. She took them to the coast. They stood on a beach where clean waves rolled onto white sand. In the distance, they could see platforms floating on the water. Those are ocean restoration stations, Ruth explained. We're rebuilding coral reefs, restoring fish populations. It's slow work, but it's working. The oceans are coming back to life. Halvin walked to the water's edge. He knelt and put one hand in the surf. When he pulled it back, his skin was clean. No oil, no chemical residue, just seawater. I taught that Earth's oceans had become toxic, he said quietly. I showed images of dead zones covering half the planet. They did, Ruth confirmed. In 2088, 60% of the ocean was anoxic. Dead, but we fixed it. We banned certain fishing practices. We cleaned up the pollution sources. We gave the oceans time to heal. By 2140, the dead zones were down to 15%. Today, they're less than 3%. They visited a memorial archive next. It was a building designed to remember the dark times. Images covered the walls. The wars, the famines, the environmental collapse, the billions who died. We don't hide from what happened, Ruth explained. Every child on Earth learns this history. We make sure they understand what we almost lost. But the archive also showed what came after. The recovery. The renewal. The choice to try again. This is the part the galaxy never saw, Ruth said. They saw our fall. They never stayed to watch us get back up. Dean Samos was reading a wall of names. Billions of names, the dead. This is humbling, he said. Your species paid a terrible price. Yes, Ruth agreed. And we learned from it. That's the point. We didn't just survive. We changed. They spent 3 days on Earth. Ruth took them to restored forests where species that had been extinct were thriving again, to farms using sustainable methods that produced more food than the old industrial agriculture, to schools where children learned in buildings designed to integrate with nature, to factories that produced zero waste. They met ordinary people. A teacher who explained how education had shifted to emphasize systems thinking. An engineer who worked on fusion reactors that provided clean energy. An artist who created murals celebrating the recovery. A farmer who managed soil that was healthy and rich again. On the third evening, they stood on a hill overlooking the city as the sun set. The sky turned orange and pink and purple. Clean colors. Beautiful colors. No smog dimmed them. I was wrong, Halvin said. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular. Just stating a fact. I taught thousands of students that this world had fallen. I was completely wrong. You weren't wrong about the crisis, Lydia said. You were wrong about the ending. Nira was crying quietly. Happy tears. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. A whole world that chose to heal. Dean Samos stood with his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. This changes everything. If Earth could recover from that level of devastation, then our entire approach to failed worlds needs to be reconsidered. We write them off too quickly. We assume the story is over when it might just be the middle chapter. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Lydia said. Ruth joined them on the hill. So, Professor Halvin, will you correct the record? Halvin looked at her. At the city below. At the clean sky above. Yes, he said. I will. Ruth's office overlooked a lake that had been dead 40 years ago. Now it sparkled in the afternoon sun, birds diving for fish that had been reintroduced just 10 years earlier. The group sat around a conference table made from reclaimed wood. Real wood, not synthetic. Halvin kept running one hand over its surface. "I need to understand something," Dean Samos said. He had been quiet since they arrived, absorbing everything. "The galactic community discovered Earth in 2087 at your lowest point. Why did no one ever come back to check on you?" Ruth pulled up files on a display screen. "Because of this." She showed them the original contact report, filed by a survey team from the Vaunt Exploratory Service, dated 2087. The language was clinical and damning. Species encountered, human. Classification, pre-faster than light technology. Status terminal decline. Recommendation, no contact. No intervention. Flag for historical study only. Terminal decline, Halvin read aloud. "We took that classification as fact. It wasn't wrong at the time," Ruth said. 2087 was our worst year. If someone had asked me then if humanity would survive, I would have said no. I was 25 years old. I watched my city burn during the resource wars. I saw people dying from diseases that should have been curable. The survey team's assessment was accurate for that moment. She pulled up another document. "This is the follow-up protocol for surveyed worlds. Every planet gets checked again after 20 years. Unless it's marked as fallen, then it goes into historical archives." "And no one checks historical archives," Halvin said, understanding, "because the story is assumed to be finished." "Exactly," Ruth confirmed. "For 200 years, Earth sat in your archives marked as a failed world. A cautionary tale. By the time we developed faster-than-light travel in 2190 and made contact with the galactic community, the narrative was already set." Lydia remembered learning about this in school. The first human diplomats tried to explain that Earth had recovered, but no one believed them. "Would you have?" Ruth asked gently. "If someone told you that a world you'd classified as terminally dying had not only survived but thrived, would you have believed them without evidence?" Halvin looked ashamed. "Probably not. It's easier to maintain an existing narrative than to challenge it." "We provided evidence," Ruth continued. "Data, images, offers to bring galactic observers to Earth. But by then, Earth's story had become too useful. Every university taught it. Every environmental course used it. Every cautionary lecture referenced it. We became the galaxy's favorite example of what happens when a species fails to act." "That must have been frustrating," Nira said. Ruth smiled sadly. "Frustrating doesn't begin to cover it. Imagine trying to tell people your world is alive and healthy, and having them pat your hand and say, 'We're sorry for your loss.' Imagine being treated as a refugee when you have a thriving home. Imagine watching your planet be used as a synonym for failure when you know the truth is so different." Dean Samos stood and walked to the window. "I've been part of this system for 40 years. I've approved countless historical curricula. I've never once thought to verify if our classified failed worlds were actually still failed." "Why would you?" Ruth asked. "The system assumes that collapse is permanent, that species who fall can't get back up. In most cases, that's probably true. Most species don't survive the kind of crisis we survived. So what made humans different?" Halvin asked. It was the question he'd been building toward since they arrived. Ruth considered her answer carefully. "I don't think we were different. I think we were desperate. When you're facing extinction, you either give up or you try everything. We tried everything. Some of it didn't work. A lot of it failed. But enough of it succeeded that we bought ourselves time. And time let us try more things. And eventually those things started working together." She pulled up a timeline. The Global Commons Agreement didn't work in isolation. It needed the Atmospheric Reversal Project, which needed the Energy Revolution, which needed the educational reform, which needed the reconciliation process. None of these things alone would have saved us. Together they created a system that could heal. "And the 8 billion who died?" Dean Samos asked quietly. "How do you reconcile that?" "We don't," Ruth said simply. "There's no reconciling that much death. We remember them. We learn from why they died. We make sure it never happens again. But reconcile? No, that's not possible." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Halvin asked, "When humans joined galactic society in 2190 and everyone treated you as refugees, why didn't you push harder to correct the record?" "We did push," Ruth said. "But think about it from our perspective. We just developed faster than light travel. We were new to galactic politics. We were trying to establish trade relationships and diplomatic ties, starting our introduction by telling the entire galaxy that their historical records were wrong for 200 years seemed like a poor strategy. So you let the false narrative continue, Dean Samos said. We chose our battles, Ruth corrected. We focused on building relationships, on proving ourselves reliable trade partners, on showing that humans could contribute to galactic society. We figured the truth about Earth would come out eventually. It took 200 years, Lydia said. Better late than never, Ruth replied. She looked at Halvin. Which brings us to you, Professor. You have a choice now. You've seen the truth. You've walked on this supposedly dead world. You've breathed its air and met its people. What are you going to do with that knowledge? Halvin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to tell the truth, all of it. The crisis, the fall, the recovery. The fact that we classified your world as failed and never bothered to check if we were right. The fact that academic institutions across the galaxy have been teaching a false narrative for 2 centuries. That won't make you popular, Dean Samos warned. A lot of people have built careers on the story of Earth's fall. I know, Halvin said. I'm one of them. But Lydia asked me a question in my lecture hall. Did I read to the ending? The answer was no. I read the middle and assumed I knew how it finished. That's not scholarship. That's laziness dressed up as academic authority. He stood and looked out at the lake, at the birds, at the life. I've spent my career teaching students how to analyze historical patterns, how to learn from past failures. But I never taught them the most important lesson. That stories have to be read to the end. That a species in crisis is not the same as a species that's finished. That giving up on understanding the full truth is a betrayal of everything education should be. Ruth watched him with approval. You're going to face resistance. I don't care, Halvin said. I was wrong. The entire galactic academic community was wrong. We owe it to truth to admit that. Nira spoke up. What about the other humans in galactic society? The ones living on stations and colonies. Do they know the truth about Earth? Lydia and Ruth exchanged a glance. That's complicated, Lydia said. Some do. Some don't. Some have never been to Earth. They were born on stations or colonies. They grew up hearing the same story everyone else heard. That Earth fell and humans scattered. We have work to do there too, Ruth admitted. The Liaison Council has been discussing it for years. How do we reach humans who've been raised on the false narrative? How do we reconnect them with their homeworld's true story? One truth at a time, Halvin said. Starting with my students. Starting with my colleagues. Starting with everyone who will listen. Dean Samos finally spoke. I'll support you. The Historical Accuracy Committee will need convincing, but I'll bring them the evidence. We'll begin a formal review of all classified failed worlds. We'll establish new protocols for verification. This can't happen again. Thank you, Ruth said. Both of you. They spent the rest of the day planning. How to present the evidence. How to structure the new narrative. How to teach the full story of Earth without diminishing the horror of what happened or overselling the miracle of recovery. It was delicate work. Important work. As the sun set over the lake, Ruth said, You asked what made humans different. I've thought about that question a lot. I think the answer is that we weren't different. We were just desperate enough to try, and lucky enough that enough of what we tried actually worked. Any species could do what we did. They just have to believe it's possible. Halvin looked at her. Then that's the lesson we need to teach. Not that Earth fell, but that Earth fell and got back up. And that matters. The return journey to Westmark 7 felt different. Halvin spent hours in the freighter's common area, reviewing footage and notes, organizing his thoughts, preparing for what he knew would be the most important lecture of his career. Nira helped him, asking questions that forced him to clarify his arguments. Dean Samos was working on his own report for the Historical Accuracy Committee. Every few hours he would show something to Halvin or Lydia, asking if he had the facts right. He was meticulous. Every claim needed evidence. Every conclusion needed support. They're going to fight this, Samos said one evening. Too many careers are built on the old narrative. Too many textbooks would need to be rewritten. Too many courses restructured. Let them fight, Halvin said. Truth doesn't care about convenience. When they arrived back at the Institute, word had already spread. The professor who taught that Earth was dead had gone to Earth. Students whispered in hallways. Faculty members exchanged skeptical looks. Some were curious. Most were dismissive. Halvin did something unprecedented. He canceled the rest of his cautionary civilizations course. Instead, he called for an open assembly. Mandatory attendance for all history students. Optional for everyone else. The main lecture hall, which seated 500, filled completely. Students stood in the aisles. Faculty members lined the back wall. Lydia sat in the front row with Nira. Her heart was pounding. This was it. The moment when the truth would either take hold or be dismissed as one professor's strange obsession. Halvin walked onto the stage. He looked different, more serious, less confident in the way he usually was. He stood at the podium and let the silence build. "I need to tell you something," he began. His voice was steady but heavy. "I was wrong." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Halvin waited for them to quiet. "For 15 years, I have taught a course called Cautionary Civilizations. The centerpiece of that course was always Earth, the human homeworld. I taught you that Earth fell, that humanity destroyed their own world through greed, short-sightedness, and an inability to overcome their tribal nature. I presented this as established fact. Historical certainty." He paused. "I was wrong." The murmurs grew louder. Halvin raised one of his hands for silence. "Earth did not fall. Earth nearly fell. There is a difference, and that difference matters." He activated the display behind him. Images of Earth appeared. Green, blue, alive. 3 weeks ago, a student in my class asked me a simple question. Did I read to the ending? The answer was no. I read the middle of Earth's story and assumed I knew how it finished. That was a failure of scholarship. It was a failure of intellectual honesty, and I need to correct it. For the next hour, Halvin presented everything they had learned. The crisis years of 2035-2089, the devastation, the 8 billion dead. He did not minimize the horror. But then he showed what came after. The Global Commons Agreement, the Atmospheric Reversal Project, the recovery that took a century but succeeded, the Earth that existed today thriving and healthy. The galactic community discovered Earth in 2087, Halvin explained, at humanity's lowest point. We classified it as a failed world and never checked back. For 200 years we taught that Earth had fallen, never bothering to verify if that was still true. It wasn't. Earth recovered. We missed it because we assumed the story was over. He showed footage from their visit. The cities, the forests, the clean oceans, the people living full, healthy lives. This is not propaganda. This is not fabrication. I walked on that world. I breathed its air. I met its people. Earth is alive. Dean Samo stood from where he had been sitting. Professor Halvin's findings have been verified by the Historical Accuracy Committee. I have submitted a formal report recommending that Earth's classification be changed from failed world to recovered world. Furthermore, I am recommending a complete review of all worlds currently classified as failed. We need to verify that we haven't made this same mistake elsewhere. The lecture hall erupted in discussion. Students arguing with each other. Faculty members shaking their heads in disbelief. Some looked angry. Some looked fascinated. All of them looked shocked. A voice called out from the back. How do we know you didn't just see what you wanted to see? That the humans didn't stage this whole thing? Halvin had expected this, because the evidence is available to anyone who wants to check. Earth's coordinates are public record. Transport there is available through multiple commercial carriers. I encourage every skeptic in this room to go see for yourself. Earth will still be there, still thriving, still proving that recovery is possible. Another voice. If Earth recovered, why are humans still so rare in galactic society? Lydia stood to answer this one. Because we have a home worth staying on. Most humans choose to remain on Earth. The few of us out here are explorers and traders by choice, not refugees by necessity. We're rare because we're not running from anything. The questions continued for another hour. Some hostile, some genuinely curious. Halvin answered each one with patience and evidence. When the assembly finally ended, students flooded toward the stage. Some wanted to argue, some wanted to see the data for themselves, some just wanted to understand. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The story spread beyond the Institute. Other universities began reviewing their own Earth curricula. News services picked up the story. Debates erupted across galactic academic networks. Some scholars supported Halvin's revision. Many fought against it. But the conversation had started, and it could not be stopped. Lydia found herself invited to speak at other institutions, to show the evidence, to tell Earth's real story, It was exhausting work, but it mattered. Every time someone heard the truth, the old false narrative weakened a little more. 6 months after their return from Earth, Halvin did something else unexpected. He resigned from his position teaching cautionary civilizations. Instead, he created a new course: Recovery and Resilience, learning from species who survived crisis. Lydia was his teaching assistant. The first class was packed. Halvin started with a simple question. Before we begin any history, I need to ask something. Do you read to the end, or do you stop in the middle and assume you know how the story finishes? A year later, Lydia received a message from Ruth Okafor. Earth's Liaison Council was establishing a Truth and Continuity program. They wanted to reach out to human communities across the galaxy, to reconnect them with their homeworld's real story. They wanted Lydia to help coordinate it. She sat in her small quarters looking at the message. Then she looked at the image she kept on her wall. Earth from space, green and blue and beautiful and alive, her people had written their darkest chapter. They had nearly ended their own story, but they hadn't. They had chosen to keep writing, to keep trying, to refuse to let the middle be the ending, and now the galaxy was finally learning that lesson. Lydia pulled up a blank document and began drafting her response to Ruth. There was work to do. Humans scattered across 100 stations and colonies who had grown up believing their homeworld was dead, who needed to know the truth, who deserved to know that their story was not one of failure, but of the hardest-won success in human history. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories of those dark years, about the choice humanity made in 2090 to try one more time, about all the people who worked for decades on projects they would not live to see completed, just so future generations might have a world worth living on. They had done it. Against every projection, against every reasonable expectation. They had caught themselves mid-fall and climbed back up. The galaxy was finally ready to learn how. Lydia smiled and started typing. The real story of Earth was spreading, not as a cautionary tale of failure, but as something more complex and more valuable. A story about crisis and choice, about falling and refusing to stay down, about the space between nearly and actually, about reading to the end before deciding what a story means. In lecture halls across 3 sectors, professors were beginning to teach a different narrative. Students were asking new questions. The old certainties were crumbling. Truth was messy and complicated and required work, but it was worth it. Earth had survived, not just physically, but in memory, in story, in the lesson it could teach. Not that falling was inevitable, but that getting back up was possible. Halvin sent her a message that evening. His new course had a waiting list of over 300 students. Other faculty members were developing similar courses. The dean of another institute had requested permission to visit Earth. The change was happening slowly, but it was happening. Lydia looked at Earth on her wall one more time. Then she finished her message to Ruth and sent it. Yes, she wrote. I'll help. There are more endings to correct. More truths to tell. We're just getting started.